Hey, folks. Thanks for tuning in to Hollerween3. You just say the BAM podcast, but this is a panel for the Hollerween3 RPG convention put on by Pinnacle Games. And today we have a whole collection of RPG talent here to talk about tips for running a horror game. And let me go around and have folks introduce themselves. With a very low and dark voice from New England, we have Walter Billiard. How you doing, Walt?
Hey guys, what's shaking?
Hey. Walt runs Hazard Studios and is a novelist and RPG designer. Thanks for joining us, Walt.
Thank you for having me.
Next to Walt in the Brady Bunch grid, we have John Kennedy, who's from my home state of Indiana. In fact, we recently discovered we had the same high school English teacher. John is also an RPG designer and novelist. So, John, thanks for being here.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah. Directly above John in the Brady Bunch grid is Ross Watson. Ross, you've got a hefty resume. You want to fill people in on who you are?
Sure. I've been in the industry for a long time. My biggest hits are probably the Warhammer 40K roleplay line, and because we're talking about Hollerween and Pinnacle, I'll say I've worked on the horror, some of the horror adventure stuff for Pinnacle. Had my own game setting called Accursed, which was horror based as well, and worked on the most recently announced thing for Savage Rifts, which is the Terror on the Dark Frontier.
Mm-hmm.
Among many other Savage Rifts products. So
sweet. And rushing in from the stands with a folding metal chair, we have Sean Noakes, also in Indiana, just like Mr. Kennedy, Indianapolis. Actually, you guys might know each other. And Sean is the author of The After for Savage Worlds. Sean, glad you could join us, sir.
Hey gang, how's it going?
Doing all right. And last but not least, my fuzzy co-host, Jacob Blackman. How you doing, Jacob?
Pleasure to be here.
You also have kind of a longish resume. Do you want to introduce yourself to the people, or?
Certainly. I am an RPG freelance illustrator and sometimes writer. For my writing credits, I am best known for working in Mutants and Masterminds with the Superpowered Bestiary line and the Superpowered Legends line. I've also dabbled a little bit here and there in some 5th edition and a couple of other smaller print products like The Monsters Are Our Heroes, where I've done an adventure. I have a couple more adventures planned, which this panel should help with some percolating some of the ideas with those.
All right. Okay. Well, hey, let's get things started. So horror can sometimes be a challenge at the gaming table. You know, how do you actually get that kind of immersion as opposed to, lots of Monty Python references and, Cheetos. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I would go first if it's all right.
Please.
I think one of the ways that I did it when I ran a lot of horror games was to make sure everybody had a little bit of buy-in. Like you talk to them ahead of time, say, listen, this is a horror game and I'm going to need your guys' help to kind of take it a little seriously, but be flexible because there's going to be times when the players are just in the mood to giggle and just in the mood to make jokes. And that's fine. Let it happen. Just kind of take a break, let everybody kind of calm down a little bit, and then get, kind of ease back into the creepy factor. But right off the bat, I would say, communication and get them on board.
Cool. That sounds good. John, what are your thoughts?
So, or just to be clear, are we talking about the occasional horror session in a regular game, or just sitting down to play a full-on horror RPG?
Honestly, we can go either or both on that one.
Okay. Well, my thoughts on running a horror RPG, even though it's kind of on the label, to use as an example, World of Darkness, where people are like, oh, it's just a world of complete evil and there are monsters everywhere. That means it's going to be the most horrific game ever. But when you sit down with your players, talk about what the limits are. I mean, I know it probably sounds weird to be like, yeah, run a horror game, but don't do these things. But the truth is, there's, it's really easy to overstep. People could do it accidentally. And you don't want to how shall I put it? You don't want to super gross out a player to the point that that's all they can think of when they game with you from now on. Oh, and obviously don't break consent because, you don't want to creep out your players either.
It's always good to not be a creep. Well, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to kind of echo what some of the other folks said because what you have a tendency to happen is you want to run that horror game, and then everybody else wants to play Saturday the 14th. And I'm dating myself with that movie. I get a couple thumbs up, so I don't feel that old. But it's one thing to have monsters, but you have to convey the right feel for those monsters, because if somebody's shouting "Wolfman has nards," you're not immersing your players in horror. It's a fun adventure. It's got monsters. That's fine, but horror should evoke a response, and if you're not getting that response, play the other game, and then hopefully plan the one you want to play, because at the end of the day, you should if you're running a horror themed game, you should be having as much fun, and if you're not getting out of that game what you're putting into it, then why do it? Wolfman has nards. So I'm going to agree with what everybody else is saying. Have a serious conversation. Say, hey, look, I want to creep you guys out. I want to have you guys running out of my house by the time the game clock runs down, and I want you to call me tomorrow and tell me that I never have to do that again. So that kind of stuff.
Nice. Sean, what do you think?
As far as running horror games, I've always kind of divided them into two big buckets, right? There's the one-shot bucket where everybody knows they're showing up for a bloodbath. There's going to be a ghost or a demon or an alien, and maybe one person's making it out alive. I almost think it's easier to get buy-in for those games just because they're so crazy. The other side of things is more of the slow burn, whether it's a long Call of Cthulhu investigation or introducing horror elements into a campaign you've already played. At that point, you have the ability to do something that a one-shot doesn't, which is to make sure that there are things in the world or with the characters that they value that are in danger. If you really want to get to a player, threatening his hit points or whatever, that's not really going to get anyone's blood chilling. But their favorite NPC that they've had so many scenes role-playing with has suddenly been carried off by the bog beast. That means something.
I can actually relate to that. So one of my first forays into GMing, and keep in mind, I'm like 17 or 18, and we were trying to run a Ravenloft game, and I had come up with this living rose garden. So the players, as they're moving through it, they're getting stung for 1 hit point. And halfway through the game, we stopped, and I asked, one of my friends, and I said, "You guys don't really seem scared." And they're like, "It's not a scary game." And I'm like, "But it's a garden, it's alive, and there's zombies, and it's a terrifying atmosphere." And they're like, "No, you're really just stealing hit points from us. It's more of a combat challenge. We are just not afraid at all." And I realized, I'm running action adventure Ravenloft. I'm not running horror RPG, horror RPG Ravenloft. So.
Right, because there are a lot of players that just don't lean into the action adventure side of it being scary.
Yeah.
If I may, I'd like to pile on a little bit of what Sean was just talking about there. The game term that I've heard often used is, punch Superman and the girlfriend. So you threaten their NPCs and player characters do get interested because they're invested in the ones that they really like. And a quick story that was from a game that I ran. My players investigated to find where the bad guy was living. It turns out he was living in the same neighborhood as one of the player characters, and his whole family was in that neighborhood. So he says, "Well, I'm heading home as quick as I can." I said, "Well, are you taking any special actions, to get there?" He says, "First, I'm going to call my wife." I'm like, she doesn't answer. He says, "Now I'm taking special actions to get home as quickly as possible." Turns out she was just walking the dog, but it really it scared him. He was like, "Oh shit, what's happened to my character's wife?" So
yeah, for horror games, the personal touch is essential. You do need to establish those lines and veils that in the session 0 before introducing the horror elements of the game, so you know what lines you can and can't cross. But the game does need to focus on the PCs and the things that the PCs love and like in the game. Otherwise, they're not going to feel that sense of urgency and horror. they're not going to be afraid. If you're having the monster run off with an NPC who they don't know or care about, or who's just pretty much a catalyst to get the story running, then there's not much going on with them, and it's just another bad guy to fight. But if you make especially if you like slow burn it, where their girlfriend is talking about how they met this new neat artist friend at the coffee shop, and then spending some time with them, and now they're spending a little less time with you, and things in the house are getting creepy, and she's dressing differently, and she's looking paler over time, and you have to really get the slow burn going, let them know that something weird is going on, but just little tidbits. But yeah, you have to make it personal. Introducing it slowly is one of the best ways to do it, because otherwise, you kind of get what I call the Pennywise effect, where the clown Pennywise from the movie It always had that he's a little too overt bit to me. He's got all this power where he can do these creepy illusions that you see in the background of the film, and that terrorizes the audience. But when he's actually dealing with the kids, it's all just right in their face, and big giant monsters and coming at them, little too overt. Whereas the creepy stuff was happening for the audience in the background. You want to have that creepy stuff happen to the PCs, and not just go right at them.
I just love watching you make the spaghetti monster flailing and into the camera, Jacob. But, Punishment 90, frequent commenter, wants to weigh in and say, my experience with running Gothic horror fantasy from multiple campaigns is that you have to encourage actual fearful role-playing as well, making things generally unsettling and dangerous. No heroes. Players, even if they aren't scared in real life, the character should act it, and usually role-play leads to the emotions you would want, as if they are really into the game. Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's another thing. The GM should check in with the players quite often. It's like, and try to bring out those emotions. How is your character feeling as this is happening? So on. Try to get them in the mood.
Cool. John, what's the best horror campaign you've ever run, or horror one shot?
It's going to sound really weird, but it was a Dread game that I was teaching to some students I was tutoring. Dread uses a Jenga tower. It is a very, very simple RPG system, but pretty much I was trying to teach these kids how to play, and they were loving it. And they came up with almost like their own like horrors in the story, because every so often they're facing essentially they're facing Pennywise, and just watching them like build up this story, which had things like fear of like being homeless, fear of never like going to college, pretty much all of that. Seeing these kids come up with their own like kind of like nightmares, and it was just a really fun way for all of us to essentially just destroy our own demons. And it got a little real at times, but I think the kids were enjoying it.
Cool. That is really interesting. Nice. Mm-hmm. Ross, same question to you.
Wow. Well, I have a very special campaign I ran several years ago called Shadows Angeles, and the short version of it is you play superpowered cops fighting demons in a cyberpunk city. So the thing was with that game, it was really where I was kind of learning how to do horror, and I was using a lot of the techniques we're actually talking about tonight. But my favorite bit was I was letting the players kind of come up with, because they're going to imagine things way better than I can describe. So I spent all my time and energy describing sort of the details around things. Like I would talk about how the terrible storm near the asylum was going, and how they could hear this subsonic roar just on the edge of their senses, and they could see like some kind of shadow stalking through the halls, and they would come up with all of the things that would creep them out based on just those descriptions. Like I didn't really, I didn't show the shark like in Jaws,
Oh, cool. Walt, same question to you.
1 year I did a cyberpunk Cthulhu meets Hellraiser. By the end of the game, there was one player left alive, and they had all been scheming to kill each other throughout the game while trying to work together at the same time. So you never knew who was going to do what. And, the whole goal was, like who could wring the most out of the box, who could get the demons to give them the most. Well, what the demon really wanted was everybody else dead. He didn't want to have to deal with anybody else. He wanted to deal with one, the best one. And they murdered each other. It was great.
Did you say your players killed each other? Remind me not to show up at your table.
Oh yeah, well, it all started when I was young with that full contact Scrabble match, and it advanced from there. But no, yeah, the player characters, schemed to basically wipe each other out, and the game was a lot of fun.
That actually sounds pretty cool. I've heard of a couple of World of Darkness campaigns that went down that way. At the very end, someone gets worm corrupted, or a few characters get worm corrupted. So, Sean, how about you, sir?
I've had just basic D&D games go to the dark place here and there, but I think the best pure horror scenario I ran was actually earlier this summer. I ran a one-shot of the Alien RPG for a bunch of players who didn't know what to expect. And I've got to say, the published adventure I ran was really good. It had a hazard in it that wasn't in the mainline movies, so they didn't know exactly what to expect. And it did a really good job of escalating things and making them worse in a truly horrific fashion. I had some really concerned looks on the players' faces, which is exactly what you want in a game like that.
I have to know, what was the threat?
If you ever saw Covenant, the black spores that would infect you and make like the weird little alien?
Yeah,
they had never seen that. So that was quite a surprise for them.
That would have been my luck if I was in that universe. I would be the one to be able to discover that planet. So,
yeah, I don't want to give spoilers, but it was really good stuff. And I've read some of their other published adventures, and it seems like it's high quality. Like if you're going to run a horror scenario and you're having trouble coming up with your own stuff, I think it's perfectly okay to lean on published material. Lean on folks who know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, I've run several all flesh must be eaten games, and a lot of them end up in a mall because at some point, for zombie fans, we just want to reenact Dawn of the Dead.
Oh, it was a great movie. I've always thought it'd be fun to do some kind of variation on Blair Witch, which you see behind me. Although I'm not sure. That's obviously kind of a one shot where everyone dies at the end. But
come on, Mike, spoilers.
In Titanic, the boat sinks. Sorry, I'm an asshole.
Spoilers for a movie that is well over 20 years old. No.
Yeah, exactly.
When I was doing my horror game, the one that you just asked me about, I had to have a conversation with my players about safety, because at least one guy in my group was saying, I don't want to have my character just die. I want to die with some sort of meaningful, cool, heroic death. And I said, listen, dude, this is a horror game. Your characters have no guarantee of safety. Like, there's no way I can do that and still present, a horror element. And he eventually came around, but I thought it was important. Like, that's a thing you got to say is like, yeah, your characters could die. Terrible things can happen to your characters. Otherwise, you're not going to get worried.
Mm-hmm.
Are there some tropes that are just kind of too played out that you can't really, like, for instance, werewolves? At this point, everyone's familiar with werewolves, knows the rules. Is it hard to do those with any kind of actual horror elements to it? Is it just action adventure once people, it's a full moon, I know what's going on, silver bullets? And
I actually no. I honestly, I lean into those tropes. You want to have one of my favorite horror movies of all time is the 1985 film Fright Night, where the bad guy is a vampire. You find out they're a vampire early on in the movie. It's established that once they start dealing with it, everything about this vampire is just like all the vampire movies. They know what its powers are. They know how to kill it. They know what to do. The problem is, it's still a vampire. It's still super strong, can shapeshift, and is super fast. It's still a freaking monster, and they're only humans. And I think that's one of the elements that people running horror games need to remember is the best way to run horror games is if your characters are just people. This is where you get some really great games like Savage Worlds, because Savage Worlds runs campaigns where you're just playing normal people very, very well. I think that's one of the strengths of the system.
Yeah, there's an old joke that if you're playing Call of Cthulhu and you ask for a bazooka and the game master says, sure, you can have one, you really need to get worried. Because if he's letting you have that kind of stuff, yeah, it's not going to matter.
Well, and I think you can lean on the other side of that trope too. And even when your players know the rules and they're prepared and they're strong in game system terms, things can still fall apart. A movie I want to point at is John Carpenter's Vampires. I don't know if you've seen it. They have a squad of vampire hunters who take all the precautions, know all the tricks. They show up with all the perfect equipment, and they still get made by the vampire lord, and it's on, and they're running for their lives.
Yeah.
And since we're using older movies from back in the day, there was in one of the first instances of a movie channel kind of creating its own content. You had the great actor. Well, I thought he was great. I thought he had a great time in that movie. Mario Van Peebles, a movie called Full Eclipse. And
love that movie.
Here's a great example of like what Jacob was talking about. Don't forget these things are monsters, because like what it does is it does this really great story convention of making the main characters feel like they're unstoppable, giving them a sense of power and sense of entitlement and all that stuff. And then they meet the real monster, and they, throughout the whole thing, they're like, oh, this is a case of staring into the abyss and the abyss staring back, and be careful what you fight lest you become it, and blah, blah, blah. And they just realize toward the end, like, oh my God, we are nowhere near the level of punishment that this thing can really deal out. So just like what Sean had been saying, and Ross, when the real monster comes calling and shows you like the terror that can produce, I mean, no matter whether you got that bazooka or not, you should probably get to stepping.
In a witchcraft campaign I was in about 5 or 6 years ago, the storyteller who was running it actually made like the auto kill weapons, like the wooden stakes, the salt circles, the stuff like that. He made them as rare as they are in our actual world. So at one point we're trying to get silver bullets to kill werewolves. And our storyteller was like, okay, well, where do you go to buy silver bullets? And I admit, don't actually know. I thought, oh, sure, a gun store would do it. Apparently they don't. We would have like the bags of salt to make salt circles. We were fighting a gigantic gargoyle thing, and it just stole the bags because the bags hadn't made the circles yet. So I think limited resources like can also like increase the tension, the horror, because if you're under like powered, you're not going to succeed. That's like a common like belief. So
great example of that is the original Resident Evil video game. I'm just going to shoot him. Well, now you're out of bullets. Start running.
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
Yeah. The resource game is very strong in horror. It's something that people should have to worry about, because you may know how to kill the creature, but do you have access to the things that can kill the creature? Lack of bullets, for example. Lack of very specific bullets. Where was I going with this? Pardon me, I lost my train of thought. It's late. It's late.
Well, while you're thinking, Punishment 90 in the comments says, "Got to throw this out there, but the idea of a one-shot inspired by The Thing." I think we're talking about John Carpenter's The Thing, not the ever-loving blue-eyed thing. The assimilation of the party and never knowing who is a monster is an extremely harsh environment is great. Oh yeah, I would love to see that as an RPG situation. Was Everyman Games doing that? Was that one of the licenses they had?
They had a couple of creatures that Everybody Games had a couple of creatures that could assimilate into you, take you over, and they were, while The Thing is very prevalent, Alex Agunas had based it more like the Leviathans from that one season of Supernatural.
Oh, where they could unhinge their jaw way back here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was creepy.
And they were pretty much indestructible.
Mm-hmm.
You could smash them, shoot them all up, but they'd come back.
Did you guys ever play a game? I mean, you guys have all been gaming. I'm guessing everyone here's been gaming for decades and decades. Did you guys ever actually play a scary session of World of Darkness?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh. Well, tell me about those. Jacob, go first.
This goes back to the question that you had asked everyone else, but hadn't asked me in regard to best horror game I've ever been in. That was a game of The Innocents. The Innocents is a World of Darkness setting where you're playing children. So not only are you a normal person, you're a kid. And in this instance, we were playing like 11 or 12-year-olds, so we were going for that certain kids on bikes feel that was very popular at the time with Stranger Things and all that. But all the creatures we were facing were very classic monsters. We were facing witches and vampires and that sort of thing. And yeah, it was one of the best horror games I'd ever been in. It was certainly terrifying, and like I said, it took place in World of Darkness.
John, how about you?
So we were playing in a vampire game. We had stumbled across. I want to say it's a Spectre from the Wraith line. Wraith's always been a weak line for me because I like it. I just can't remember much from it. But it was one of the evil ghosts. But the thing is, we didn't actually know who in this hospital that we were going into was the ghost. And it was terrifying because we started seeing family members in the hospital, and we knew certain family members for our characters were in the hospital. And it was like, oh, we should try to get them out, but ghost shenanigans ensue. And the reason why it was very terrifying was because the ghost kept hopping from host to host, kind of like in The Thing, but it would bring out our worst fears. So essentially, we're dealing with like nightmares come alive, and the stronger these nightmares were, they actually attacked us. And it was just imagining, like, I think for my character, I think it was like a cousin who was sick. Imagining a cousin who my character was close to, and imagining them being in mortal danger, being possessed by evil shadow ghost thing. And it was just a really, intense but fun moment because kind of like towards the end of the adventure, it was kind of like the scene in Harry Potter where they're like fighting that monster that makes their fears come to life. In the very end of it, we were like going around beating up bullies from high school and like burning down like tax offices. It was kind of just, it was a fun game.
Yeah, cool. What are some ways you integrate horror elements into a thing that maybe isn't horror from the get-go? Like Sean, we were talking yesterday in the after. There are elements in there that you could, make in a horror session or two, but and out of the gate, it's not really written that way. How would you do something like that for that setting, do you think?
Yeah, I definitely didn't write it as a horror book, but it's a real easy knob to turn. There are lots of situations where you and your group are out in the wilderness alone, You could be trapped by snowfall or by an avalanche. You could run out of food. And there are certainly scary things that go bump in the night. There are elements of body horror with the butcher tech implants that really want to be in your body a little bit more than you might want them there. And with, the potential to have your body changed against your will with the power of the breach, it would be really easy for a GM to play that up and really make the After a pretty scary place.
Yeah, I mean, we were part of our inspiration from that was The Revenant, which is by itself not a horror movie, but there's some very scary parts of it. Fighting off a bear in the middle of the wilderness by yourself, etc.
Right, and I think a lot of the most horrific elements of the After happened in the backstory of the setting, but there's always that fear, that echo. What if it happens again? What if they come back?
Mm-hmm. Russ, you've written some horror situations for Savage Worlds, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? How the system lends itself towards horror?
Well, Savage Worlds is far more like involved in pulp adventure than horror. Although the new horror companion is kickstarting, like either just finished or is still going, I think. So go check out the horror companion because it's going to have.
It's still going. It's only been up for like a week so far.
There you go. So yeah, go check out the horror companion for Savage Worlds because that's going to have all the stuff you need to make that particular system work for you in terms of horror. I wouldn't say that on its baseline, Savage Worlds is particularly good at horror, but the fact of the matter is it doesn't matter what the system is. If you're a good GM, you can make horror just about into anything. I was going to say one element you can do to add to a game to bring in horrors. Remember that we're easily scared when we're in our most vulnerable. So like imagine if your character is asleep or swimming or in the shower or on the toilet or just relaxing in a cafe somewhere and they get a mysterious message. And sometimes that mysterious message could just be a knock on the door and a letter shoved under the window or whatever. But if you're asleep and you're woken up by that, like that can be really frightening. You'd be like, oh shit, somebody's watching me, somebody's there. And you can take that message as far as you want, right? There's a lot of different ways to leave a message, but just remember when your characters are vulnerable, when your players feel vulnerable, that's a good time to introduce a horror element.
I always thought that the smart speakers like Alexa or Siri, she just heard me. I thought that would be an incredible element to throw into a horror scenario. Have your smart speaker start saying crazy things to you, especially if you're sick or in a weakened condition or hungover or, just telling you, start speaking Sumerian or, reading Latin or, there's a whole bunch of different ways that could be, legitimately creepy, especially if it starts, kind of drip, just a little, oh, it's just a glitch. It's no big deal. But
Liberate tutame ex infernus.
That'd be creepy, right?
You also got that movie that recently came out, Upgrade.
Yes. So good.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
So good. I mean, and an example of AI transcending what it was intended for, and the unintended consequences. And is it really out to? Is it operating in your best interest at the end of the day?
Some Black Mirror shit right there. That was good.
Yeah, you ain't lying, bro. That was good stuff.
In terms of creepy things that people can take in or ignore at their will, I just watched a bunch of episodes of The Cabinet of Curiosities, which is being produced by Guillermo del Toro. So,
first one was so good.
Yeah, it's a horror anthology. I highly recommend it. They've been pretty good so far. But there's one called The Autopsy that stars F. Murray Abraham. And towards the beginning, where he's just starting the autopsy, there's this scene where he hears his inner voice say, run away now. And then he looks at himself in the mirror, is like, run away from what? And proceeds from there. Horror ensues.
Punishment 90 says, hey, horror is amazing with the idea that a pursuer enemy the players can't kill is always a great idea. The Terminator, for example. Well, yeah, I guess that would be in that genre, wouldn't it? Because I don't care what anyone says. Terminator 1 is a horror movie. Yeah,
absolutely.
I don't
Absolutely.
see how it could be anything but. Yeah. Oh, that is interesting stuff.
I've got a question for the group. Kind of rolling back to the player that is maybe problematic leaning into a horror game. How do you run a horror property for a player who knows all the rules? How do you run Call of Cthulhu for someone who's read all of the Cthulhu stories, or Alien for someone who's read all the tie-ins and the comics and knows everything back to front? How do you make it interesting for a player like that?
I would make them essentially, if they sure they've got the knowledge, prove it. I mean, if the player knows that the werewolf is vulnerable to silver, either switch it up, and try not to do it last minute so that it looks really cheap, but be like, oh, maybe it's not vulnerable to silver anymore. Maybe in my world, it's gold. Gold is the sun. Werewolves can't be werewolves in the sun. You can tell I've thought about this before. But other than that, also just be like, hey, it's collaborative here. I mean, you might know all the rules to aliens. You might know about the eggs and facehuggers. But if you really want like a scary game, like the full experience, maybe just let off a little bit, sit back and enjoy it.
Yeah, the problem with problematic players is whether they choose or not to be problematic. If they buy into the horror genre that you're setting up, then great. But if they're deliberately choosing not to, that might be one of those opportunities where you may just have to ask them to leave the table for the sake of everyone else's enjoyment. Now, they may, like John said, they may know the tropes. They may know what to do. But again, there is that resource part where we were talking about earlier in the discussion. Do they have access to the things they need? Not only that, but do their characters have the skill for what they need? Sure, you can have the wooden stake. Is your character strong enough to pierce the flesh of a vampire's the fierce and the sternum and bone of a vampire's chest? Are they? Try it. What's the dice roll? Huh? Come on.
One of the best scenes in Aliens is when Ripley goes to sleep with Newt. Now, Ripley knows all the rules. She's fought the aliens before, but she's asleep in a room with a child and no weapons. And Paul Reiser leaves the facehugger in there for her. When she wakes up and realizes she's trapped in a room with a facehugger, all that knowledge doesn't help her. She's like, oh shit, right?
Well, and in a way, the knowledge does help her. They start with a shot of the empty jar. Right. That's what she sees first.
Sure.
And being the one with the knowledge, she knows exactly what it is.
Yeah, but that's where the dread really ramps up, though.
Right. Too. It was wonderful. It's a great scene.
And Punishment says, Walt Billiard, I would be terrified of you running an alien game. And Walt says, would you be terrified or thrilled?
That's how you do.
Porque no los dos.
Well, it depends on whether Walt's running an alien game where we're playing normal people exploring and that, or whether Walt's running an alien game where we get to be colonial marines.
Hoorah.
To quote Newt, it won't make any difference.
Why don't you put her in charge?
And a great thing about that problem player, if you really have that problem player and he's just out to be the mayhem of the group, let him. Say, look, here's the deal. Here are 5 aliens. You can only use one at a time, and you can't pick another one until the previous one is dead. Now kill all the other players. You're the alien they're hunting. Now here's the deal. If there are no more aliens left by the time we're done with our game tonight, the pizza's on you, bitch.
I'm all about introducing real-world consequences from role-playing games. I knew a guy who used to play Battletech over in Germany, actually, U.S. Army. And they all spend a lot of time, carefully painting their miniatures. And every game session, they brought a hammer.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Okay, if someone destroys my minis that I have spent time painting, that's them's fighting words.
I never thought Battletech could be a horror game.
Interestingly enough, I've got a project called Dominions of Steel coming out next year that is very BattleTech inspired, but it has some horror elements to it.
If you think about it, there's an awful lot of genres that you wouldn't think could be horror movies, but you wouldn't think could be horror, but like kaiju movies. Well, those aren't horror, but then you think Cloverfield. That's clearly a horror movie, and it's a kaiju movie. So
I weirdly love that movie. Like, I know it's probably not considered one of the better kaiju movies out there, but for me, I think it was, for the time, it was unique. And yeah, the thing that scared me about that movie was less the giant monster, but the evil body lice it had, the ones that they bit you and you blew up. Sorry for a spoiler for a movie that's almost 20 years old now.
Mm-hmm. Rosebud was a sled. Yeah, no, I'm cool, man.
I'm not a big fan of Cloverfield, but I loved 1010 Cloverfield Lane.
That was good.
Is definitely horror.
That's the John Goodman one, right?
Yes.
Okay. He's trying to rescue some people from the carnage, takes them into his bomb shelter, and crazy things happen.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of psychological horror in the start, and then other horror later.
Yep, and Ramona Flowers is in it too. So,
and it's weird. The series is told in reverse. Cloverfield Paradox is the next one, and I also enjoyed it. It was pretty good. Probably less horror, more sci-fi though.
It's all about context. It's all about context. I mean, Event Horizon is horror, but in 40K, it's just Tuesday.
I love that movie.
That is true. That is true. Yeah, there's an awful lot of horror in Deadlands, right? Usually don't think of Westerns as being a horror setting, but Deadlands, it's, mash that peanut butter and chocolate together. So
I'm honestly surprised there isn't more horror Western. There's a couple of decent horror Westerns I've come across, but they're very few and far between.
Bone Tomahawk.
That's a good one.
The Revenant, as we touched on earlier. So, trying to think of other genres not necessarily horror, but that can be horror. Superheroes. I was used to think there's no real way. I mean, can have horror elements, but it seems like the last decade they keep finding reasons to have DC and Marvel superheroes fight zombies
or vampires.
Brightburn,
yeah.
Brightburn's good. Creepy, but good.
Go ahead.
That's creepy, evil Superboy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and a lot of people attribute that to a deconstruction of the genre, and it's not. It's not a deconstruction of Superman. It is Superman as a horror villain. It's entirely different.
They got the Batman Who Laughs now too, so there's multiple versions of that.
I was going to say Werewolf by Night, which came out last month, is also been really, really good.
Really? Is that a one-shot or a series? I haven't watched that yet.
It was a one-shot. It's less than an hour, and it's magnificent.
Really? All right. I'll check that out then. Now, you would think the Moon Knight lends itself to horror because, mummies. But it's pretty much just straight up, pulp superheroes. That's what makes you laugh, Ross? Ooh, mummies?
Yeah.
Okay.
They really could have played up the horror from the point of view of the main character not knowing what's going on, and they kind of chose not to do that.
Yeah.
He was in a lot of situations where he didn't have control, and a lot of scary things were happening. They really could have played that up.
They kind of played it for laughs, as it was.
Well, I think tone is really important, especially if you're running a horror game. You want to, talk to your players about tone and use examples. A lot of these movies we're talking about are great examples of different types of tone, and that's a good way to kind of communicate to your players what kind of horror tone you're going for in your game.
And once again, I guess it gets back to talking to your players, so what kind of game they want to be in, get everybody on board, with what you're trying to do, get buy-in before you get started.
Yeah.
So, Well, we're heading towards the top of the hour, and I'm getting angry texts from my wife asking why I'm not upstairs. So we should probably wrap things up. Closing thoughts. I'll start with you, Sean.
Well, I think it's really fun to dip your toes into horror if you're not an every week GM. I mean, it's Halloween. Why not try it? If you don't want to mess up your regular campaign, throw down a one-shot. Surprise your players.
Cool. Ross, what are your closing thoughts?
I really like what Sean just said. One shots at Halloween are traditional. My favorite one is I have a game where you're all juvenile delinquents who are basically given public given a sentence to clean up an amusement park after closing, which is a great scene for horror. Yeah,
Sort of a Willy's Wonderland.
Could be all kinds of things.
Jacob, since you're talking, closing thoughts.
Yeah, horror is an excellent genre to play with. I highly recommend it for any game. I've done it in a variety of things, from fantasy to superheroes. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on what you're introducing, who your players are, and how far they're willing to go. Make sure you don't cross their lines and veils, because I have gone too far sometimes, and that resulted in some bad games and some bad blood between me and my friends. So be wary of such things.
Okay. Ross?
You already did me.
Oh, sorry. I'm fighting off the flu. Please forgive me. John, you get to take us out. What's your final thoughts, sir?
So echoing what everyone else has said, know your players' limits. But something that I just wanted to comment on is don't go too fast, too hard, too soon. Because sometimes the mystery is nice. We talked about Jaws earlier. I mean, the audience, we know it's a shark. We established from the get-go. But you don't know the size of it until you actually see it swimming alongside the boat. And it gives more context to how truly monstrous the creature is. Same with other horror movies. Like, if Cthulhu shows up in the first act, what's in your second and third acts? So you want to just give just enough that your players are terrified and they want to know more. And then pretty much at the end, that's when the whole horror is revealed.
Cool. All good stuff. And forgive me for being a commercial shill, but Sean and I have been working on the After Kickstarter, Tales from the Trail Volume 2. You can find our pre-launch page up on Kickstarter now. Please give it a look. It's going to be awesome. Your life will be better if you have it in there. And Jacob, Ross, John, Walt, Sean, appreciate all you guys coming out to hang with me tonight. John and Sean and Walt, it is super, super late where you guys are, so appreciate you staying up so late to talk to us.
Hey, it was great fun.
Good deal.
Glad to be here.
Yep, fist bump for everybody.
Cool. All right. Well, hey, thanks for checking out Hollerween3. There's lots of other cool panels and games. Have a good time this weekend, folks, and we will see you next time. Take care.